She was just a girl in a worn leather jacket, trying to escape the rain. When the skies over Seoul opened up and the rain came down hard, Seori did something most people wouldn't do. She stopped in a dark alley, knelt down, and gave her only meal to a starving man hiding under a hood. By morning, the rain was gone, but something worse had taken its place. A line of black luxury cars blocked the street. Men in dark suits stood everywhere, cold and silent like statues. And at the center of it all was a man who didn't ask for anything. He came to take over her world. Rain hammered down on the metal roofs of the alley, loud and steady. It didn't feel like just a storm. It felt lonely. Since evening, the rain had washed over Seoul, dulling the bright neon lights and turning the streets into a maze of wet walls and long, dark shadows. Back in the alley, everything felt forgotten. The air smelled of wet concrete, and the sound of the city was far away, softened by the heavy rain. A flickering open sign from a nearby shop glowed red, its weak light reflecting in the puddles like a fading heartbeat. Seori pulled her jacket closer around her. Her fingers were cold after working a long, double shift. At 24, she had already learned how to stay quiet, how to endure, and how not to be noticed. She walked carefully through the alley, holding a small bowl of hot food she had saved for herself. All she could think about was getting back to her cold apartment. This was the kind of night people stayed away from, not a night for kindness. And yet, she saw him. A figure sat against the wall, half hidden in the shadows. Something about it felt off. Seori stopped walking. In that moment, everything changed. The person crouched on the ground wasn't dangerous. Not drunk. Not a ghost. He was a man. Young. Shivering. His hood covered most of his face, and his clothes were completely soaked. His hands rested on his knees, steady but tense. His face was tight with hunger, not just for food, but like someone trying to hold on and survive. For a few seconds, Seori just stood there. Then she moved. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, almost lost in the sound of the rain. "You look like you haven't eaten in days. Here." The man didn't move at first. He didn't speak. He just looked up. For a brief moment, the red light hit his eyes, and there was something sharp in them. Something dangerous enough to make anyone else walk away. But Seori didn't think about that. She didn't think about what this choice might cost her. She stepped forward and offered him the food. She thought she was helping a stranger. She had no idea. She just stepped into a world she could never escape. And by morning they would find her. If you're enjoying this already, don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's get into it. The rain in Seoul didn't just fall, it chased you. It covered the narrow alleys in Seori's neighborhood, turning the ground into a dark, shiny surface that reflected the weak neon lights of a city that never truly rested. Seori pulled her worn leather jacket tighter around her, but the cold had already reached deep into her bones. At 24, her life was all about getting through each day. Long shifts at the convenience store, rent that kept going up, and the constant hunger she had learned to ignore. In her hands, she held a small bowl of spicy noodles wrapped in plastic. The steam fogged the lid, and she held it close, enjoying the little bit of warmth. It was the only thing she had saved for herself that day. The alley she took was dark and quiet. Most people stayed away from it at night, but Seori walked through it without fear. She didn't have anything worth stealing anyway. Then she saw him. He was sitting against a wet brick wall, almost blending in with the trash bags and broken crates nearby. His hood covered most of his face, but she could still see his body shaking. Not just from the cold, but from something deeper. He wasn't drunk. He wasn't a ghost. He was a man, maybe only a few years older than her. His face looked sharp and tense, even in the dim light. Seori stopped walking. Her heart started beating faster. Part of her told her to leave, but another part of her, stronger, told her to stay. She looked at the food in her hands, then back at him. "You look like the rain is beating you," she said softly, almost lost in the sound of the storm. The man didn't react right away. Slowly, he lifted his head. For a brief second, a faint red light reflected in his eyes, and they were not empty. They were sharp, alert, almost dangerous, like someone who had been pushed too far. "I don't have much," Seori said as she knelt down, not caring that the wet ground soaked her clothes. She opened the plastic lid. The smell of garlic and spices filled the cold air. "But you can have this." She gently pushed the bowl toward him. He didn't say a word. When he took the food, his fingers brushed against hers. His hands were rough, but warm. The small touch sent a strange feeling through her, like something important had just happened. He started eating, not wildly, but carefully, like he was trying to stay in control, even though he was starving. Seori watched him quietly. Something about the moment felt heavy, different, like this simple act might change something she didn't yet understand. After he finished, she slowly stood up. The rain had already soaked her hair. She didn't ask his name. She didn't wait for him to thank her. She just turned and walked away toward her apartment, not knowing that behind her, the stranger was listening closely, memorizing the sound of her footsteps. Morning didn't come with soft sunlight. It came with noise. Seori woke to a deep vibration under her floor, like something powerful was waiting outside, followed by the heavy sound of car doors shutting all at once, echoing through the narrow street. She rushed to the window and pulled back the curtain, her breath catching at the sight below. The alley, usually filled with trash bins and stray cats, was gone, replaced by a line of black luxury cars and men in dark suits standing still and silent, their eyes hidden behind dark glasses. They didn't look like police. They looked like something far more dangerous, like men who had come with a purpose. A sharp knock hit her door, and before she could react, the lock clicked open. Not forced, just opened, as if they already had the key. The man who stepped inside didn't just enter the room. He took it over. Jang Taesung stood in her doorway, calm and in control, dressed in a perfectly fitted black suit. He was taller and broader than she expected, and his presence made her small apartment feel even smaller. Everything about him was controlled, even the way he breathed. He smelled clean and expensive, like wood and rain, completely out of place in her home of cheap coffee and damp clothes. Seori stepped back until she hit the edge of her table, her body tensing as she felt small and exposed under his steady gaze. He didn't speak at first. His eyes moved around the room, studying everything like he was searching for a weakness. Then he looked at her. His face showed no anger, only cold focus. He adjusted his sleeve slightly, his watch catching the light, and for a moment, the only sound was the low hum of the cars outside. "Yoon Seori," he said, his deep voice filling the room. It wasn't a question. He already knew. "You spent your last money on a man who was meant to stay invisible. In my world, kindness like that comes with a price." He stepped closer, and the air felt tight. "The debt he owes you now belongs to me," he said quietly, his eyes locked onto hers. "And I'm here to collect." The silence, after his words, felt heavy. Seori gripped the edge of her table, her fingers turning pale as the low hum of the cars outside filled the room, making it feel like something was waiting, watching, like her world had already been taken over. Jang Taesung moved slowly around her small kitchen, not touching anything, but taking in every detail, the chipped plates, the tiny stove, the simple life she had been struggling to hold together. "The man you fed last night," he said calmly. "His name is Han Jian." His voice dropped, colder now. "To the world, he doesn't exist. People only hear about him in whispers. He handles things quietly." He paused, then looked straight at her. "To me, he is my brother." Seori's breath caught. He was injured, starving, surrounded by people who wanted him dead. "You could have walked away. You should have." He stepped closer. But you didn't. His eyes locked onto hers. You knelt in the rain and gave him your only food. You didn't just help a stranger. You saved someone very important. Seori swallowed, her voice small. I didn't know who he was. I just thought he was hungry. Taesung studied her for a moment. That's exactly why you matter now, he said. In my world, kindness is rare. People either pay with money or with blood. He stepped even closer, the space between them tightening. You chose kindness, but that choice has a cost. Seori's heart began to race. The people chasing Jian know someone helped him, he continued. They won't see you as just a normal woman. They'll see you as a weakness, something to use. Her stomach dropped. The life you had here, he said, glancing around the apartment, ended the moment he took that first bite. The words hit hard. Then he lifted his hand slightly, gesturing toward the door. Don't pack anything. Everything you need has already been prepared. His voice was calm, final. You are no longer just Yoon Seori. He paused, his gaze steady. You are a debt. I intend to settle myself. The ride felt unreal. One moment, Seori was in her small, worn-out apartment, and the next, she was sitting inside a silent black car, moving smoothly through the city as traffic parted without question. No one stopping them. No one even trying. When they arrived, Taesung led her into a private elevator that moved quickly and quietly, and when the doors opened, everything changed. The floor beneath her feet was smooth and dark, shining like glass, and the air felt clean. Almost too clean, cold and controlled. She stepped into a large space surrounded by tall windows, where the city below looked small and distant, like a world she no longer belonged to. Taesung walked ahead as if he owned everything, and the place didn't feel like a home. It felt like a fortress. Then Seori noticed someone standing near the window, and her breath caught. It was him, Han Jian, but he wasn't the same man from the alley. He was clean, standing straight and strong, dressed in sharp, fitted clothes that showed his solid build. His face was calm, his features clear, but there was still something dangerous in the way he stood. He didn't move at first, yet his presence filled the room. Jian, Taesung said, his voice calm but firm. Your debt is here now. Make sure she stays safe. Jian turned, and his eyes met Seori's. For a moment, everything else faded. She saw the same man from the rain, but stronger, focused, dangerous. He stepped toward her slowly, stopping just close enough to make her heart race. He didn't smile or speak. He simply gave a small nod, but somehow it felt like a promise. Then he stepped back and moved to the door, standing still, watching everything. Alert, ready, no longer weak or helpless. He wasn't the man she had fed anymore. He was her protector now. Seori looked around the beautiful space, everything perfect, everything expensive, and yet it didn't feel free. As she watched Jian, standing there in silence, she realized something important. She may have left her old life behind, but this new one came with its own kind of danger. Here, nothing was simple, and everything had a price. The days after the gala were not easy. Seori didn't relax or enjoy her new life. She spent every day learning. Jang Taesung didn't treat her like a guest. He treated her like someone he was preparing. He brought her into his private study, a quiet room filled with dark wood and glowing screens, and began to show her how his world worked, power, control, and the balance that kept everything in place. He explained how fear and loyalty were used, how money moved, and how powerful people were connected to places most would never see. Seori sat across from him, with her hands resting calmly in her lap, looking as quiet and simple as always, but her eyes were different. She was focused, paying attention, understanding everything. One evening, Taesung leaned back in his chair and studied her. You're not asking if this is right or wrong, he said. Most people would be scared by now. They'd want to leave. Seori met his gaze, without hesitation. "I've lived in the world you control," she said. "I've seen what happens when there's no order. I'd rather understand it than pretend it's not there." The room fell silent. Taesung stood and walked toward her slowly, stopping right in front of her. Without warning, he reached out and lifted her chin, forcing her to look up at him. He expected fear, but there was none. Her skin was steady, her heartbeat calm. In that moment, he realized he had been wrong about her. She wasn't just someone who endured life. She was strong, quiet, and unbreakable. The air between them shifted, becoming more personal, more dangerous. His thumb brushed lightly against her lips, his expression darkening, not from business, but from something deeper. "You were never weak, were you?" he said softly. Seori didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned slightly into his hand. "I was just waiting for a reason to fight," she replied. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then suddenly, a red alarm light flashed on the desk, breaking the moment. Something was wrong. The alarm meant one thing: danger. Jang Taesung wasn't there. He was away handling important business, and now the penthouse was exposed. The lights flickered as backup power kicked in, followed by the sound of distant gunshots, quiet, but real. Seori didn't panic. She looked at the monitors and saw masked men moving through the building, working together and heading upward. Then she turned to Han Jian. He was already in motion, calm, focused, dangerous. He opened a hidden panel, pulled out weapons, and checked them quickly before tossing a protective vest to her. "The main elevator is down," he said, his voice low and steady. "They're coming up the stairs. We don't go down, we move forward." The air felt heavy with tension. Jian grabbed Seori's hand, his grip firm and grounding, and instead of heading for the main door, he led her into a hidden passage. "Get on my back," he said, and she didn't argue. As they moved through the tight, dark space, a loud explosion shook the building above them, glass shattering as the attack fully began. They emerged a few floors below into an unfinished area filled with metal beams and hanging plastic sheets. But they weren't alone, for men were already there. Jian didn't hesitate. He moved fast, silent and precise, and within seconds, the men were down. But then another attacker appeared behind him, aiming straight at his side. There was no time to warn him. Seori reacted instantly, grabbing a heavy metal pipe and swinging with all her strength. It struck the man's arm just as he fired, sending the shot wide as a nearby light shattered, flashing blue across the room. Jian turned and finished him quickly, then looked at Seori. Really looked at her. Something had changed in his eyes. Respect. He said nothing, but squeezed her hand tightly, understanding. She wasn't the same girl anymore. "Keep moving," he said quietly. "The roof is our only way out." The smell of smoke still clung to Seori's clothes, a reminder of the penthouse that was supposed to be safe, but had turned into chaos. Now they were in a secure safe house. Jang Taesung sat across from her, and for the first time, he didn't look perfect. His suit slightly wrinkled, his hands marked from the fight. In front of him, screens were filled with data, security footage, reports, messages, but none of it gave clear answers. Whoever attacked them had covered their tracks well. Seori sat quietly with her hands folded in her lap, slightly shaking, but her mind was calm, focused on thinking and breaking things down. She remembered small details. The man at the gala, Director Choi, who had avoided her gaze, and the strange sound of the elevator being taken over. That kind of control could only come from inside. "You're looking in the wrong place," she said softly. Taesung looked up. "You think the enemy is outside, but they're already inside." His eyes sharpened. "Choi has worked with my family for 20 years. He built this system," he said. "That's exactly why you don't suspect him," Seori replied as she stood and walked to the main computer. No one had ever paid attention to her before. She was just the girl, someone unimportant, and that worked in her favor. They hadn't hidden anything from her. She began checking the system logs carefully, not looking for something big, but for something small, a pattern. And she found it. Every Tuesday, at exactly 4 a.m., there was a 3-minute gap in the security system, perfectly matching Choi's schedule. She pulled up more data. A hidden account, illegal transfers, money disappearing slowly over time. He didn't betray you for power, she said quietly. He did it because he was desperate. She pointed at the screen. He's been losing money, gambling. He's been taking from you to survive. Taesung stepped closer, studying the evidence. It was clear, simple, and completely missed by everyone else. He looked at Seori differently now, not with surprise, but with respect. You saw what my best men couldn't, he said quietly, placing his hand over hers on the keyboard. Seori didn't react. She kept her eyes on the screen. They didn't see me, she said. That's why I saw everything. The boardroom was silent, cold, and heavy, with rain hitting the tall windows and filling the space with a steady sound. Director Choi sat at the far end of the long table, looking neat and calm as always, but his fingers tapped his pen nervously. His eyes shifted to Jang Taesung, then briefly to Seori, still seeing her as nothing important, just a girl who didn't belong. Taesung didn't sit. He stood at the head of the table, his presence filling the room. Without a word, he signaled the screens to turn on, and data appeared. Security gaps, money trails, hidden accounts. Everything Seori had uncovered. The pen slipped from Choi's hand and hit the table, the sound echoing in the silence. You built this system, Taesung said calmly, but you made one mistake. His gaze shifted slightly toward Seori. You ignored someone you thought didn't matter. Choi tried to speak, but no words came out. Taesung placed his hand on Seori's shoulder, not to protect her, but to present her. To you, she was just a girl, he continued, but she saw everything you tried to hide. The atmosphere in the room shifted as the other men looked at Seori differently now, no longer dismissing her, but watching her carefully, even with fear. Taesung turned fully toward her, his hand still resting on her shoulder. I brought her here to repay a debt, he said, his voice clear and firm. That debt is now finished. From today, her words carry the same weight as mine. The room went completely still. She is not a guest anymore, he added. She stands with me. Seori stepped forward, calm and steady, no longer the same. She looked at the men who had once ignored her. Now all eyes were on her. The girl from the alley was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who understood this world, someone who was no longer afraid. She wasn't just part of this world anymore. She had claimed her place in it. The rain still fell over Seoul, but it didn't feel scary anymore. To Seori, the sound of it hitting the metal roof above the kitchen was calm, almost comforting. It sounded like work, like life moving forward, not like hunger or fear. The alley had changed. It was no longer dark and forgotten. Warm lights filled the space. The walls were clean, and the air carried the smell of fresh food, garlic, spices, and hot soup, making the place feel alive. Seori stood behind the counter, serving food with the same gentle, careful movements, but now there was confidence in everything she did. She wasn't just serving meals. She was helping people survive. She wore her old leather jacket over a simple dress, holding on to who she used to be while standing in who she had become. When she spoke, people listened. They respected her. They saw her. The small bell above the door rang softly. Once it would have made her nervous, but now she simply looked up calmly. At the end of the alley, through the light rain, a black car sat waiting. Han Jian stood beside it, quiet and alert, watching everything, still sharp, still dangerous, still protecting. Inside the car, behind the dark glass, she knew Jang Taesung was there, watching. He didn't come inside, he didn't need to. This place belonged to her now. This was her world. They didn't need words to understand each other. He controlled the power of the city, and she took care of its people. Seori wiped the counter slowly, no longer thinking about the past, but about what she would build next. She stepped toward the doorway, letting the cool air touch her face, and for a brief moment, her eyes met Taesung's through the window. He leaned forward slightly, and just for a second, he smiled. A small, quiet smile meant only for her. Seori turned back into the kitchen as steam rose around her, warm and steady. The rain continued outside, but her storm was over. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was in control now. This story shows that real power doesn't come from force or control. It comes from kindness and strength of character. Seori didn't have money, status, or protection. All she had was a kind heart, and still, she chose to help someone when she had nothing to gain and everything to lose. That one small act changed her entire life. It also teaches that power isn't just about being strong or feared. You can control people with force, but you earn real respect through understanding, patience, and awareness. Seori saw things others ignored, and that became her greatest strength. In the end, the story reminds us that no act of kindness is ever too small. Even something as simple as sharing food with a stranger can set off a chain of events that changes everything. Sometimes, the smallest choice leads to the biggest transformation.